And that was the wrap-up of the 3 study trips from yesterday. And with that in place, we're ready for this morning's keynotes and workshops. And let me just remind you that for the first keynote here, you can use Menti to ask your questions. You just follow the QR codes. Our first speaker this morning is Elin Slätmo. She's the Senior Director Research Fellow at Nordregio. And in this session, Elin will be exploring how farmland ownership shapes Europe's food security and sustainable food production. With recent global crisis obviously highlighting the urgency, she will show how understanding who owns the land is central to food sovereignty, food security, and sustainability. So please welcome Elin. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So I'm glad to be here today to talk about food and the farmland. So this is one of my nerd interests, I would tell you. So most of you know that I've been at Nordregio now for 8 years already, so it's been a lot of different type of topics, and I have a lot of them in my mind. But I'm always coming back to this soils and the farmland topic, as it was where I started my PhD journey back in 2009. And I studied farmland preservation and soil preservation in Norway and in Sweden. And now I had the opportunity 2 years ago to start a small investigation on farmland ownership, but on a European scale. You know, very excited. I'm about to do that. That was great. And now we have some results, so we thought we could look into some of those together. If we then focus on the European scale, let's see, that it's important to have the basic facts first of all, and that is in 2018, around 39.1% of the total area of the European Union were agricultural land. That's the fundamentals for the food production, so to say. And that land was farmed by 9.1 million farms. But that number has decreased a lot. It is decreasing in the individual countries, but also then in the European Union as a whole. So the number of farms have declined from 2005 to 2020 with 37%. So it's a lot of the farms that have been closed down for the individual farmers. But this process is also then combined with the process of land concentration. So the land, this 39%, is still constantly the same amount of farmland. And this process is not only happening in Europe, but also globally. That we have a process where the large farmer is buying up the land from the smaller ones. And this is then concentrating the ownership of land to fewer and fewer people. And so what? Do you think? What do you think? Is it important? Yes, I think it's important, just not only for the individual farmer or for the company owner, but also for the possibility for us as people to have access to food. And in light of the recent crisis, including the war in Ukraine, to understand who owns the land and how farming is governed is urgent. This, in the long term, can influence our access to food in times of peace, but especially during crisis. So, based on this nerd interest of mine, I had opportunity to look into these issues a little bit more. We wanted to investigate if it was any data available on ownership of land. And after a long process, we identified data on Eurostat, the open access data source, with ownership data dividing the ownership into 3 different categories. It's natural persons, so that is family farms, basically. And then legal persons, that is companies that is owning land. And then group holdings, which is a category in between. It's either family farms that goes together in owning the land, or it's companies that goes together in owning the land. And then they end up in this category, group holdings. So first we wanted to look into this data. Can we make a map for all Europe on who is owning the land and the percentages and such, and the changes over time? And then in the second step, we wanted to investigate, but what does it matter? Does it matter at all? Or in what way does it matter? So we wanted to explore the linkages between the ownership and different sustainability indicators. So then we combined the data with the social and environmental sustainability indicators. I should unpack that a little bit for you. So it means that we looked into data such as well-being of farmers, so that is more social sustainability. How does the farmers in self-assessment say that they're doing in their daily life? We also looked into access to food, depending on the farmland ownership patterns. And regarding environmental sustainability, we focused on indicators such as biodiversity in the farmland, those high natural value farmland, and also soil quality and linkages to water quality as well. So that was the interlinkages we wanted to do. And then in the third step, we also identified the more economic sustainability. So we wanted to see if the farm turnover, if that was influenced by who was owning the land, so to say. So now I will look into some of the results together. And I should say that I have not done this on my own. So it's also very much thanks to Carina, who is one of the GIS team members at Nordregio. And also I have collaborated with a French researcher called Tristan Bejean. So this is the map for Europe when it comes to the patterns of family farms. So here we can see that the dark green colors indicate that it's family farms that owns most of the farmland, and it's in percentages. We can see by the map that the dominant patterns is that we still have farmland that is mostly owned by families, and that is a pattern ongoing in the global, but also in Europe. So here we see that in 2020 it was 67% of the farmland that was owned by family farms. But we also wanted to investigate the other categories. What about company ownership? We see most clearly in Central and Eastern Europe that there is a rise in company ownership of farmland. So this is something that is a pattern that is ongoing in all over Europe, but especially in these regions. We also wanted to look at the third category, the group holdings, and here we can see that we also have an increase in that type of ownership type over time, especially then in France and in Germany, and this is due to the change in legislation, especially in France, where they opened up for this type of ownership being part of the system, so it's more easy then to access this type of governance forms. And then we wanted to, me and Carina, look at the changes over time. Can we see any changes? And this map is, of course, very intricate in that sense that we wanted to see any possible change on a map, and it was possible to do, but we have to then dive into a little bit deeper what is happening to understand it a bit. We can say that, as I already mentioned, that we have still a dominance in family farms owning the land, and we can see that but we can also see that we have a rise in company ownership. That is ongoing then from 2016 to 2020. And then we have indications that in certain countries, in certain regions, we have these group holdings owning the land together. So then we wanted to take it a step further. Why do we have this shift in company ownership? And does it matter? What type of effects does it have? For this presentation, I cannot go into all the details, of course, but I will tell you a little bit of the economic performance. It's clearly that the company-owned farms often show stronger economic performance, but it's not universal. Also, local conditions in each country play a critical role. But we see that in 84.7% of the regions with increased company ownership, they also have an increase in economic turnover. So this indicates or motivates a change in ownership from the farmer's perspective. It means that it's more easy to make more money if you change your type of ownership. However, it's important to highlight that this also then potentially undermine the food security and food sustainability, because this company ownership comes with an increase in a distant farming where there's a separation of the ownership and actually farming. And this ownership separation from farm management can then undermine the sustainability. It reduced this possibility to adapt the farming to local conditions, and it also creates a risk of speculative land grabs. The speculative land grabs, I will try to unpack that a little bit for us. So some of these company ownership of farmland is linked to foreign direct investments, and Europe is a major recipient, but also provider, thanks to Norway, of foreign direct investments globally. And these investments are investments made by one economy to acquire lasting management power into another economy, often in enterprises. It brings capital to the sector, it brings capital to the food sector and agriculture sector, but it also brings risks. So here is a paradox. We see that with foreign direct investments, we have an increase in agricultural productivity, we produce more grains, we produce more, but it's also threatening the local food system, it's threatening the access to food on the regional and local markets. So what do policies say about this situation? Do we do anything about it, or is it okay? How is it? Well, we can see that, oh, sorry for that. I think I mentioned the risks already. So we can see that the policy situation on the European Union level, according to a leaked document, which is then here on the slide, we see that according to a leaked document that's not formally approved yet, the European Commission will try to steer this via a strategy for generational renewal among the farmers. So there they will also try to target this land grab situation, as they call it. But as it is for now, the member states regulate land markets independently. And across Europe, we then have a very varied situation. We have heavily regulated land markets, such in Croatia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and also Norway and Sweden. And we have more liberal land markets, such in Czechia, Denmark, Ireland, and Finland. As a researcher, I would say a more harmonized EU directive in this regard could help balance these foreign direct investments with sustainability. But I understand as well that it's very political sensitive, as it is a question about subsidiarity, how much power you want to give to the European Union and how much you want to hold on to yourself. Some final reflections. I think I would like to end by saying that farmland ownership is a cornerstone of sustainable and resilient food system. And we can see that the patterns in farmland ownership are evolving, changing over time. And we will also must highlight that the economic gains must be weighed against social and environmental risks. If you give some kind of policy recommendations, I would say that the policy must safeguard food sovereignty and access to food, and try to improve the transparencies in these type of land transactions that is going on. And we need to strengthen the oversight of the foreign direct investments. From the regional and local authorities, I would say it's important to be aware of farmland as an asset in the planning, that you preserve it as something to hold on to in times of peace, but also in times of crisis, of course. It's like the fundament for food. And also those of you that are working with public procurements for foods and schools and hospital, that you in these processes support the local farmers and the regional farmers. So with that, I would say that if you would like to read more about this nerdy stuff, you are welcome to read our journal article that is just published. So with that, I say thank you.
Thank you. And there are a few questions that have come in for you, Elin, so I'll just go ahead and ask what the audience wants to know. So one question is there a typical size of the companies owning the farms? And which countries of origin are the FDIs? Do we know anything about that? You mentioned Norway, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. They are coming from, the foreign direct investments are coming mostly from US and China, but also that Europe are investing in Europe, of course. Yes, that is also happening.
But mostly US and China?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
That's
and the other part was, is there a typical size of the companies owning the farms?
That I don't know, actually. That is something for further investigations, I guess.
Okay, further investigations.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. Another question, what were the correlations between land ownership and environmental sustainability?
Yes, this is existing. We didn't show to include it in our journal article here because we thought that the data was a little bit outdated, because it's the most prominent indicator that we thought was best regarding the data. It's already back from 2016, so we thought it was a little bit not certain to use it. Like it was biodiversity levels in and surrounding the farmland, and this is of course then needed to be updated to see, because 2016 is already like a little bit too outdated to say much about it. But it's possible, of course, to do something, and we started to look into the patterns, and we can see some patterns, but as the data was a little bit outdated, I didn't want to go into too much of the details.
But parting on that, we have a big discussion in Denmark, where I come from now, that we're actually reducing the amount of acres, of hectares that are used for agriculture. We're taking out 400,000 hectares over the next years for sustainability, for the health of our waters, and for the contamination that comes from some of the agriculture. Is that happening in other parts as well, or is it? We are at 60% of our soil being agriculture, but is that happening? Are we reducing the area that we are harvesting?
No, I mean Denmark is very unique and progressive in that sense from a sustainable perspective. But at the same time, I saw news that Denmark is also using the pension funds to invest in Hungarian farms and Romanian farms. So at the same time, they are outlocating the food production elsewhere. Yeah. So these processes are, of course, interlinked in this sense. It is not easy to say like what to do and what not to do in these regards. We can only try to provide knowledge in this sense and say.
But I was wondering if it's a tendency that countries are looking into maybe not having so much agriculture, but you don't see that happening.
No.
Okay, excellent. Next question comes from the audience. Often family farms run the farm with a legal entity. Is it correct that the ownership is within the family, but they use a legal entity to buy equipment and handle the business side of the farm?
In general, yes, but it depends on the country, of course, how it is developed and how it is possible to handle it in the different countries. But this is a way for the state authorities in Sweden and Norway, for instance, to preserve the soil and preserve the land, to separate it like that. But it still can be able to do it within a family farm setting, sort of. So it's still run locally.
And then time for one last question from the audience. When companies take over the family-owned land, do they keep using the land for farming, or do they use the land for other things?
Yeah, both, I would say. They are also we can see this industrialization of the food landscape. That is a lot of different other type of activities going on the land as well, that they're using it for renting out for machineries, building up these solar panel fields, and other types of installations that are more industrial than actually the more old school type of food production. So definitely a mix there going on.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was what we had time for. Thank you for speaking to us this morning, Elin Slätmo.